is the question on everybody's minds right now. Is Samsung's Galaxy S20 Ultra the best camera phone on the market? We put it up against the Pixel 4 and the iPhone 11 Pro with some cameos of the Huawei P30 Pro just to see exactly where it lands. So you know the first thing that we had to check out was that zoom. So let's get right into it. We took a little stroll down to Battery Park to take a look at the Statue of Liberty from afar, and this is something that a lot of people might do. Traveling or at sports events, you might not be able to get close to that thing that you want to see, but let's see how these four phones handled getting to it. First, for reference, here's a regular photo at 1x with no zoom taken on the S20 Ultra. This is pretty much how it's going to look on any phone at this point. If we punch into 5x zoom, you can see the most grain on the iPhone, but colors are still better than the P30 Pro, even if it is sharper with its optical zoom. The Pixel with no telephoto lens looks surprisingly good with its color and detail reproduction, but the S20 Ultra's photo is already in the lead here with the best all-around composition. Punching in closer to 10x zoom, we leave the Pixel behind at about 8x where it maxes out, and the iPhone 11 Pro maxes out at 10x here too. Surprisingly, 8x zoom on the Pixel is still less blurry than the iPhone at 10x. At this point, the P30 Pro and S20 Ultra have created some very pleasing crops here with excellent composition of color and detail. So now that we've left the Pixel and the iPhone behind, we started to get a little bit more creative. Here we are at 25.5x zoom, where we can see that the P30 and S20 are still picking up impressive color and detail, but the S20 is just edging it out a little bit further with its better color representation. Still, both are getting a little bit grainy, so we punch in just a little bit further to max them both out just to see what happens. So at 50x zoom, the Huawei P30 is maxed out. And as you can see, things are pretty grainy and a little bit dark. Punching into 100x zoom on the S20 is pretty grainy, but still impressive nonetheless. Colors are picked up well, and it's hard to think that we could have ever even seen this from as far back as we actually were. It's even harder to think how we could ever use this in real life. So more testing was needed. So here we are in Jersey City on the 10th floor overlooking the beautiful New York City skyline. Let's see what we could pick up at 10x zoom. For reference, here's the 1x shot from the iPhone, which represents generally how it looked on each phone. Zoom in 8x where the Pixel maxes out, and you get arguably the best photo of the set between that and the Galaxy S20. The iPhone and even the Huawei P30 don't stand a chance here. So we stepped into the light of day with this zoom, this time in a nature scene to see what we could get better, perhaps in the daytime. Again, here's our 1x photo for a frame of reference. Zooming into 10x and 8 for the Pixel, the optical versus digital disparity is wide. While the Pixel and iPhone are barely usable, the S20 gets a perfectly shareable and cute shot. The P30 does hang with detail capture, but overall composition easily goes to the S20 here. Punching in further to 30x zoom, where only the P30 and S20 can go, both shots are significantly less pleasing or shareable, but perhaps doable in a pinch if it's something really cool that's really far. Things are getting significantly less shareable now, so for fun, we punched in a little bit closer just to see what we could get. So we maxed out the P30 at 50x zoom, where the S20 still beat it out, albeit a very grainy and pixelated image. Then we just had to see how 100x zoom would look, which, much like 30x and up, can do in a pinch for something extremely cool and extremely far, but it's not something you'll much want to share with people otherwise. Of course, we'll have more in-depth analysis of the zoom lens in our full review, but it seems already that the 100x zoom and kind of everywhere in between isn't something that anybody can compete with right now. In this mural wall painting, you can see that the iPhone's processing sometimes zhuzhes things up a bit, while the Pixel and S20 can look a little flat even if the Pixel shows more accurate colors. In this shot of figurines, you can see that the S20 has a tough time focusing on Pikachu and Sailor Moon on the outskirts of the center of this image, though it does have the best color. The iPhone produced an odd yellow tint, though things were a better focus, but the Pixel has the best all-around look. In this picture of my colleague Jen sitting on the couch, you can see that the S20 gets overcome by a sort of magenta tinge, while the iPhone and Pixel don't seem to have much trouble producing a well-composed image. Moving on to a more dynamic neon sign, the S20 mellows out highlights but ends up flattening things a bit, even though it composes a decently accurate picture. The iPhone is most boisterous with its highlights and color reproduction, and it may make for the most pleasing picture out of the three here. Through these sets of photos, it's clear that the S20 Ultra still lags just behind the iPhone and Pixel 4 when it comes to producing consistently great dynamic and daytime shots. But then there's the wide-angle camera, where the S20 pulls ahead once again. The S20's ultra-wide lens is able to pull in some better colors and does better work with dynamic range, as seen in this bus photo. Also, in this long view of a street with art on the walls, the iPhone loses details and adds purple fringing around the branches, whereas the S20 pulls in a nice balanced shot. We see the S20's better details in this photo of the glass carousel. Along the branches, you can see better details and more sharp representation of the subject. While the iPhone still looks good, the S20 quality ekes out just ahead. Portrait shots with good lighting show similar color differences, but in this instance, we found the S20 Ultra capturing an unfocused subject in its live focus mode. The Pixel and iPhone captured the same subject just fine. Much like you'll find with daytime photography, a lot of the differences are going to come down to personal preference, but the S20 is much improved over the S10 in low light imagery. It avoids overly warm tones without night mode, but risks losing color and pop. In this city landscape, the S20's photo loses any hint of blue in the skies that we see in the Pixel and the iPhone shots. The iPhone's photo is a bit more yellow, but I tend to prefer it over the other two. The Pixel definitely finds the best color compromise between accuracy and pop. In this photo of a restaurant at dusk, the S20 introduces a slight magenta tinge like we saw in some dynamic daytime shots. The iPhone and Pixel come away with better looking and more accurate pictures in this scene. Along the boardwalk, we see the same divergence, with the S20 taking on a more purplish hue, the iPhone a warmer one, and the Pixel a colder but slightly more accurate rendition. I'd say somewhere between the Pixel and iPhone was the most accurate to my eyes in the moment. Which brings us to the dedicated night mode, where Samsung's made some improvements, but it's not quite where it needs to be yet. First, let's start with the good. In this picture behind the glass carousel, you can see that the S20 picks up some sharp details and colors with a lot of character. This is easily my favorite version of this picture. The iPhone's comes off rather yellow, while the Pixel is again in the middle with probably the most accurate colors, but some grain to it too. In this photo of a statue, you still see sharp details and popping colors on the S20, but it's also quite yellow, and the statue itself is actually out of focus. The iPhone 2 is a little yellow, though not nearly as bad, and it has the best details of the statue with proper focus. The Pixel cleans up all yellowness and produces the most accurate colors, but details aren't quite as sharp as we see on the iPhone. With this shot of the pier, we see a similar situation, but the iPhone this time is the most yellow, with the S20 having the sharpest details. Still, the Pixel gets the details and colors right, but has some trouble with the highlights and back. The S20 probably comes away with the best picture here. With this picture inside of a restaurant, things get even worse for the S20. It takes a very yellow photo, even though it captures some excellent bokeh and detail. The iPhone gets the best mixture of color, detail, and depth, just slightly edging out the Pixel here. In very dark situations, the S20 Ultra really starts to struggle with producing a balanced photo. For reference, here's the shot without any night mode enabled. This is pretty much how it would look across all three of these phones without their night modes on. And of course, any night mode comparison wouldn't be complete with a few shots of those stars. What we find here is the S20 lags behind again, having trouble getting decent handheld star shots. Both the Pixel and iPhone turn in about the same results for this, but nothing compares to the stunning shots captured with the Pixel's astrophotography mode, which is only triggered when it's in a tripod. And you know we couldn't go this long without testing some selfies, of course. Samsung's thankfully over-beautifying and over-sharpening less with the S20, but it still can wash out facial details that come across better on the iPhone and Pixel. And this is all without the beauty mode enabled. The iPhone trends a little warmer, but it is a little more pleasing to me at least. The Pixel, as always, has the most neutral color capture. In more dynamic scenes, the S20 handles dynamic range better without washing out the entire shot as the iPhone does, while the Pixel once again grabs the most realistic photo with the S20 right behind it. When it comes to video, the S20 Ultra has some big stats behind it. 8K video looks great, but it's still prone to some of the issues that we see on lower resolution filming with the S20 Ultra. Without Super Steady enabled on the S20, you can still see some shutter roll and minor glitches in the imagery, which don't feel quite as smooth as the Super Steady movement with which it's stabilized. Since the iPhone doesn't necessarily have a Super Steady mode, we compared 4K 60 frames per second with Super Steady enabled on the S20 to the best that the iPhone can do with its 4K 60 frames per second video capture. You'll see the S20 negate a lot of wobble that the iPhone still has, but you'll also notice less shutter roll on the iPhone side. They both do excellent color and detail capture, but panning the camera still looks best on the iPhone here. Turning off Super Steady increases these issues for the S20, and the difference is noticeable as the iPhone is world smoother. You'll want to keep Super Steady stabilization on as much as possible with the S20 Ultra. So there you have our first in-depth comparison between three of the biggest behemoths in phone photography right now. We've learned a lot. For instance, there's just no replacement for optical zoom. Similarly, there's no replacement for really good image processing. But a lot of this does come down to preference, so make sure you sound off in the comments below and let us know what you prefer and what your needs are.